I can heal your eyes, sir. The words dropped into the still air like a pebble into deep water, soft, almost fragile, but impossible to ignore. Thomas Grant turned his head toward the voice, though his ice blue, clouded, and long empty of sight eyes could only grasp darkness. All around him, Central Heights Park buzzed with the ordinary sounds of a Houston afternoon. Rustling trees, children's laughter, the faint screech of tires in the distance. His fingers curled around the iron bench. He knew this park well, not by sight, not anymore, but by feel, sound, and memory. It was the place Judith brought him every day. His wife said it lifted his spirits, though lately she seemed more distracted. She'd guide him to the same bench and then wander off, her voice fading as she spoke to someone on the phone nearby. Thomas never asked questions. He was tired. The voice, a young female, came from his left. But what startled him most was not the sound. It was the moment. She had waited. He hadn't noticed her before, but she must have been nearby. Perhaps behind the tree-line, perhaps by the old lion statue. And only after Judith's heels had clicked out of earshot did the girl approach, quiet, cautious, as if this opportunity were rare and dangerous. "What did you say?" he asked, heart suddenly unsure. "I said, I can heal your eyes," she repeated. This time more clearly. No hesitation, no laughter, just certainty. A bitter smile tugged at Thomas's lips. "You can't even imagine what's been tried. Surgeries, labs. My own company worked years on technologies that failed. And now you think you can fix this?" "I don't think," she said simply. "I know." He turned slightly, trying to sense her presence. She was close, maybe sitting beside him now. Small frame and steady breath. He hadn't heard her footsteps. "Why would you say something like that?" She was quiet for a moment, then whispered. "Because I heard her." Hear who?" "The woman who brings you here," she said. "Your wife." His hands went still on the bench. "I live near here." The girl continued. "Sometimes I sleep in the alley behind the coffee shop when it rains. I've seen you two every week for months. She always walks away to talk on the phone, so I listened. I didn't mean to, but I did." Her voice dropped lower. "She said she did it. She said, you were finally blind, and she was close to getting everything." Thomas's chest tightened. Something ancient and fragile inside him cracked. "I don't know how she did it, but I think she wanted you gone or helpless." The girl's voice trembled. Not from fear, but from something older, like knowing too much at too young an age. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. "I didn't want to say anything in front of her," the girl added. "She scares me, but I had to wait until she was gone. I had to make sure it was safe." Thomas leaned back slowly. The breeze carried Judith's voice faintly through the trees. "Thomas, time to go, darling." The girl stood. He could hear the soft rustle of her worn shoes on the concrete. "I'll be here tomorrow, same time." She disappeared as quickly as she came. Thomas didn't move. Not when Judith's familiar perfume drifted closer. Not when her hand reached for his. His mind stayed behind with the little voice that saw through more than his blindness. And the promise she carried like a flicker of light inside the dark. For the first time in a long time, Thomas wondered, what if he hadn't lost everything? What if someone still saw him? Thomas Grant did not sleep that night. He sat in his leather armchair, surrounded by shadows that did not end when he closed his eyes. In the silence of his luxury penthouse high above the pulsing lights of downtown Houston, he relived every word the girl had spoken, every soft note in her voice, every pause that felt intentional and full of truth. The stillness of the room was too complete, not a sound from Judith. She hadn't returned to their shared suite after he had said he was tired. Just a note. Had to take a late call. Sleep well, Jay. He didn't reply. Instead, Thomas sat in darkness, his fingers pressed together, palms sweating, a strange sensation for a man who had once controlled billions in assets, made decisions that changed lives with a word. He hadn't felt powerless then. But now he was left to wonder whether the greatest betrayal of his life had happened right under his nose, or rather right in front of his blind eyes. That morning, Judith's routine was unchanged. She helped him dress, her touch efficient, but devoid of warmth. She mentioned a lunch meeting she would have to step away for, apologized in a rehearsed tone, and let him out like always, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble hallway. He said nothing. In the car. Silence again. When they reached the park, she guided him to the bench with practiced ease and said, "Back in a bit, darling," before walking off toward her usual spot near the stone hedges. He listened carefully. "No, girl. Not yet." He waited, heart pulsing, palms still damp. He counted the seconds, then the minutes. Birds chirped, people passed. A child screamed joyfully in the distance, and then faint footsteps approached, barefoot or close to it. "Sir," her voice was different this time, quieter, as if worried someone else might hear. "You came back," he said, trying to mask the relief in his tone. "I told you I would," she said simply. He turned toward her. "What's your name?" "Jada." "Jada," he repeated. The name felt warm on his tongue. "Human solid. How long have you been watching us?" "A while." There was no guilt in her voice. No embarrassment, just truth. "I thought she cared for me," he muttered. "Maybe she did," Jada offered. "Once, but now she's planning something. I heard her say she has a lawyer ready. She said once your board thinks you're no longer capable, she'll take over everything." Thomas let out a breath through his nose, slow and controlled. "I knew something was wrong. I felt it. But you telling me it changes everything." She shifted on the bench beside him. "I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to warn you. You should know." "I appreciate that," he said genuinely. There was a pause. Then she added, "And I meant what I said yesterday. I can help you. You're 10 years old, maybe 11. What makes you think you can help a blind man?" He meant it kindly, but it came out sharper than he intended. "I don't mean it like doctors do," she said. "I don't have machines or medicines, but sometimes I feel things. I know things about people. Sometimes I touch someone and I can feel something shift." Thomas was silent. She continued, "I think it's why I knew she was lying. I didn't hear just her words. I felt it like poison in the air." He didn't laugh. He wanted to. He wanted to call it childish fantasy. But something in her voice made him hesitate. Something raw and oddly grounded. She wasn't performing. She was telling the truth as she knew it. "I felt people change before," she said. "But never someone like you. Like me." "Sad," she whispered, but still waiting. He swallowed hard. "You could run," she said. "You could leave her. You're rich, right? Go somewhere else." "I can't just vanish, Jada. There are contracts. There's a board. There's reputation. And I can't see. That makes people nervous." "You're scared," she said with no malice. He didn't reply. After a moment, she stood. "I don't know if I'll come back tomorrow." She's starting to look around more. "Wait," he said. He reached out, missed, then adjusted until his hand lightly touched hers. Her skin was warm, dry, real. "If you don't come back, I won't know what to do." Before we continue the story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching this video from. Who knows? Someone right near you might be watching it, too. And don't forget to leave a like for the little girl, for her courage and remarkable intelligence. She said nothing. Then she whispered, "Then I'll come, but be ready. Not just to see, but to believe." And like yesterday, she was gone. That night, Thomas didn't return to the penthouse right away. He had the driver take a longer route home. He asked to be left in the car, alone, engine off, parked near the old Bayou Bridge. He needed silence, and not the hollow silence of wealth, but the silence of choices made too long ago. He thought of Jada, of her calm, her strange wisdom, her refusal to be afraid. He remembered how Judith once held his hand the same way before the money, before the boardrooms, before ambition wore down love into habit. He touched his Aisha's useless eyes and wondered for the first time in months if perhaps blindness hadn't just taken his sight. Maybe it had revealed something far worse. That he hadn't been seeing for years, long before the accident. He had been walking blind into his own undoing. And now a little girl with nothing had given him the one thing he hadn't even known he'd lost. Perspective. Thomas Grant woke up with a tremor in his chest. Not from fear, at least not the kind he recognized, but from something deeper, like a memory just beneath the surface that refused to be forgotten. He lay in bed for several minutes before even considering getting up. The voice of the little girl Jada in his mind. Be ready, not just to see, but to believe. She had said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if healing the blind was a matter of trust, not medicine. The morning moved forward as if nothing had changed. Judith served him black coffee, 2 eggs, toast slightly burned the way he used to like. She spoke with pleasant efficiency, discussing a brunch with the executive team, then a quick stop at the law firm. Her tone was breezy. Her heels clicked perfectly in sync with her words. He wondered how long she had practiced this. The calm, the care, the control. Would you like me to bring you to the park again today? She asked with a bright tone, lifting the toast to his lips. Thomas paused. Yes, he said, voice smooth. It's good for me. Her chair shifted slightly as if she wasn't expecting him to say yes so easily. The ride to Central Heights Park was silent as usual. Judith fiddled with her phone. He could hear the soft taps of her screen, the buzz of incoming messages. Her perfume, intoxicating, felt too sweet now, artificial. When they arrived, she led him again gently but firmly to their usual bench. As she placed his cane by his side, she leaned in close and kissed his cheek. Back soon, she said sweetly. He waited until the sound of her heels faded past the fountain before speaking. Are you there, Jada? He didn't expect a response right away, but after a few moments, a quiet voice said, yes. She had been watching again, waiting for her moment. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I wasn't sure either, she admitted. But I saw her checking her watch. She doesn't stay long, just long enough to make a few calls and be seen. Thomas shifted slightly, his fingers tightening around the bench's edge. You said something yesterday about feeling when someone changes. How does that work? Jada sat down beside him. He could hear the rustle of her coat, too thin for the season, maybe worn through at the elbows. I don't know. I just sense things. It's like there's a part of people that glows inside. And sometimes that glow gets dark or cold. Some people flicker. Some people burn bright and then go out. Thomas was silent. You, she said slowly. Your glow's quiet but steady like it's been buried under a lot of dust. He laughed softly, a sound that surprised even him. Dust is about right. She shifted closer. Do you remember what it was like before? Before the accident, before everything when you were happy. He wasn't ready for the question. It hit him like a forgotten song on an old radio. Familiar, intimate, painful. I don't know, he said honestly. I remember moments. Laughter with my son when he was little. Judith, back when we were real. My work used to mean something. We built things created. It was simpler then. You missed that? Yes. There was silence. Then she asked, what would you do if you could see again? Thomas tilted his head. Considering I used to think I'd want to read the news, watch the market, get back to work, but now I think I'd want to see people's faces just to know if they match their words. Jada didn't speak for a while. Then she said, sometimes people's faces lie too. He turned toward her voice. But yours doesn't, does it? She didn't answer that. Instead, she asked, can I show you something? He hesitated. What do you mean? Not something you look at, something you feel. She gently took his hand, turned it palm up, and placed something into it. It was small, round, cold at first, then warming in his grasp. He ran his fingers over a rough texture, a thin string attached. "It's a stone," he said. "Sort of. It's from the creek under the bayou bridge. I wrap them in cord, I find. I give them to people who need something to hold when they feel lost." He squeezed it gently. "It's beautiful." "You can't see it," she said. "I don't need to," he replied. She smiled. He could hear it in her breath. Just then, Judith's voice rang out, cheerful but firm. "Thomas, ready to go, love?" Thomas froze. Jada whispered, "Don't tell her about me." "Not yet. She's not ready to know what you know." He nodded slightly. She slipped away again, like the breeze through the trees, gone before Judith reached the bench. "Have a nice time?" Judith asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. He turned to her, smiled faintly. "Yes, very," she seemed pleased. "Good. I'll make us dinner tonight. Something simple." "Steak?" "Sure." But all he could feel was the small stone in his pocket and the warmth of a child's voice that knew more about him than the woman who had shared his life for 30 years. That night, Thomas stood at his window, facing the blur of city lights he could no longer see. He whispered to no one. "I think I'm starting to believe." It rained the next morning. Not the kind of thunderous downpour that drowns the city in chaos, but a slow, steady drizzle that blurred the skyline and made everything feel quieter. Judith complained softly as she pulled the umbrella from the coat closet, muttering something about her suede shoes and the inconvenience of wet weather. Thomas said nothing. He merely listened to the rain, to the tension in her voice, to the sound of the world shifting around him in ways he couldn't see but had learned to read. As usual, she led him down to the car, buckled his seatbelt with polite detachment, and barely spoke on the way to the park. When they arrived, she hesitated. "It's wet," she said. "Do you want to skip it today?" "No," Thomas said too quickly. "I'd rather go." A pause, then, "All right, just don't catch cold." She brought him to the bench, brushed off the rain with a cloth from her bag, and placed the cane beside him. 15 minutes, she said, then walked off toward the far hedge, umbrella tapping against her shoulder like a metronome. Thomas sat in the drizzle, feeling the chill bite into his skin. He didn't care. He reached into his coat pocket and ran his fingers over the wrapped stone Jada had given him. The cold texture had a grounding effect. It reminded him that yesterday hadn't been a dream. Footsteps approached, light, careful. The unmistakable sound of small feet avoiding puddles. "You came," he said without turning. "I promised," Jada replied. "Besides, I don't mind the rain. It makes people move slower. They don't notice me as much." He smiled. "Clever." She sat beside him. And for a while, they said nothing. The sound of rain on leaves filled the silence. Then Jada spoke. "Can I ask you something strange?" "Stranger than a little girl offering to heal a blind man." She giggled. "Fair point." He waited. "Have you ever felt light?" Thomas turned slightly toward her. "Felt it." "Not seen it?" "Yeah," she said. "Like not with your eyes, but with your skin or your chest? Like something warm moving through you?" He considered. "Maybe once years ago when my son was born, I was holding him and I remember feeling something inside me crack open, like sunlight through a window I didn't know was there." Jada nodded slowly. "That's it." He didn't ask how she understood something so abstract. He just accepted that she did. "I think people carry light," she continued. "Some carry more than others, some lose it, some never find it." "And you?" he asked. "I don't know," she said softly. "I think I see it in others more than I feel it in me." There was a sadness in that, a loneliness too mature for her age. "You're wrong," he said. "You carry a lot more light than you realize." She didn't respond, but he felt the bench shift slightly as she leaned closer. "Your wife," she said carefully. "She's not just taking your company. I think she's scared of you getting better." "Why?" Because if you do, you might leave her. Thomas said nothing. The thought had crossed his mind, uninvited, unwanted, but it was there. Not out of spite or revenge, but from clarity, from waking up. Jada, he said. What do you want from all this? She was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she said finally. Maybe I just want to matter to someone. Even for a little while. You do? He said firmly. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. Then she reached for his hand again. I want to try something. Just trust me. He offered his hand without hesitation. She placed both of hers around it gently, firmly. Close your eyes, she said. He almost laughed but obeyed. Now breathe. He inhaled slow and deep. Think of that moment you told me about your son. That light had did. And then something shifted. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a miracle. But something inside him softened. The rain faded, the sounds dulled, and he felt something not quite warmth, but presence, an awareness he hadn't felt in years, as if his body remembered being whole. When he opened his eyes, useless though they were, he was crying. I didn't see anything, he whispered. But I felt, I don't know, peace. That's a start, Jada said. He squeezed her hand. Thank you. She stood. I have to go. Your wife is watching today. Thomas turned his head instinctively. How do you know? I can feel her, Jada said, her light flickers when I'm near. It gets cold. Then she slipped away. Thomas sat in silence, the rain tapping softly on his shoulders, the stone in his pocket growing warm in his hand. Judith returned moments later, voice tight. You're soaked. Why didn't you call me? He didn't answer. She sighed, wrapping the blanket around him. You'll catch pneumonia out here. He leaned into her arms with practiced stillness, but said gently, Judith, why don't you ever sit with me anymore? She paused, just long enough for him to notice. I want you to have your quiet, she said quickly. You need space to think. He nodded slowly. But the thought had already planted itself, not just a seed of doubt, but of knowing. And the girl who had placed it there, she carried more light than anyone he'd ever known. Thomas Grant had never thought much about how he walked. For most of his life, it had been automatic, one foot, then the other, propelled by certainty and purpose. But since losing his sight, each step was deliberate, cautious, measured like a man counting the edge of his own fading dignity. That morning, however, he felt different. There was something in his chest, a thrum, a quiet sense of forwardness. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the conversation with Jada the day before, or the moment when he felt something move within him, like dust shaken loose from a forgotten light bulb. Whatever it was, he woke up determined not to sit on that bench all morning. He wanted to walk, to feel the world again. Judith was uncharacteristically quiet on the drive to the park. He could tell she was watching him in the rearview mirror, but she didn't say much. No talk of meetings, no affectionate banter, only silence measured in thin like a thread about to snap. At the park, she helped him from the car, adjusted his coat collar, and placed his cane in his hand. Same bench, she asked. No, he said. I'd like to walk a little today. She hesitated. It's still damp. You sure? I am. He felt her fingers press briefly against his shoulder, then slip away. Don't go far. I'll be over by the hedge. He nodded and took his first step. The walkway was slightly uneven. Stones shifted from years of root growth beneath. Thomas moved slowly, feeling out each patch of ground with the tip of his cane. His ears tracked every noise. The soft flutter of pigeons, the wind brushing through tree branches, and somewhere, faint and far, the voice of a young girl singing under her breath. He turned slightly in that direction, just enough to listen. But the sudden cry of a toddler nearby startled him, and he lost his footing. One wrong step, his cane hit a shallow dip between the stones, and his balance shifted violently. His foot slid out, his body tilted sideways, and then impact. Pain exploded in his wrist as he hit the ground hard. His hip slammed into the edge of a concrete step, breath knocked from his lungs. He tasted blood. A sharp gasp escaped him, and he lay there frozen by the sting, by the shame, by the brutal reminder that no matter what light he might be discovering within, his body was still fragile, still blind, still breakable. "Mr. Grant," the voice rang clear, high, and urgent. Small hands touched his back gently, then his arm. "Don't move yet," Jada said, her breath close to his ear. "I saw you fall. I was coming to find you." "I'm fine," he muttered. "No, you're not," she said with calm insistence. "Your hand's bleeding, your wrist looks swollen. Just help me sit up." She did carefully, slowly, as if she'd done it before for others. Maybe for herself. He leaned back against the cold base of the park's old war monument, breath shallow, pain burning up his side. "I didn't see the drop," he said. "Bitter, stupid mistake." "You didn't see anything," she said. "That's not stupid. That's just real." He gave a dry chuckle. "You're too honest for your age. And you're too proud for yours." The words hit him harder than the fall. She pressed a folded cloth against his bleeding palm. "We need to get this cleaned. You might need stitches. I can call someone." "No time," she said quickly. "She's coming." He turned his head. "Judith?" I heard her voice. "She's looking for you." Sure enough, within seconds, Judith's heels clacked fast and sharp across the stone path. "Thomas!" "Oh my God, what happened?" Jada vanished swift as shadow behind a bench. Thomas sat up straighter, pain flaring. "I tripped," he said. "Misjudged the edge." Judith was instantly at his side. "You shouldn't have walked alone. I told you this path isn't safe." "I needed to move," he said calmly. "We're going home," she said. "Now, this is too much. I should have hired someone." He bit back a reply. As she helped him to his feet, he gritted his teeth, bracing against the sharp pain in his hip. He leaned heavily on the cane. "I'll call Dr. Sandler. We'll stop by his clinic." "No," Thomas said, "take me to the house." She hesitated. "But you," I said, "house." Her silence said more than words. She led him back to the car, this time with firmer hands, her tone clipped. In the back seat, Thomas held the blood-streaked cloth in his palm and stared blindly ahead. He knew Judith would use this moment as evidence, as proof, another step in her plan to portray him as incapable, frail, unfit to oversee anything. Not his company, not his fortune, maybe not even himself. But something had shifted again. Not broken, just bent, like a bone realigning. Back at home, while Judith busied herself on the phone, likely whispering to a lawyer or a doctor, Thomas sat alone in his study. He opened the drawer of his old oak desk and found what he hadn't touched in over a year, a recorder. He pressed the button and spoke softly into the mic. "This is Thomas Grant. If anything happens to me, I am declared mentally or physically unfit. I want this on record. I have not lost my mind. I may have lost my sight, but I have not lost my will." He paused. "And I am not alone. There is a girl named Jada. She's not a hallucination. She's more real than anyone else in my life right now." He clicked it off and placed it in the drawer. Then, reaching into his coat, he pulled out the stone she had given him. He held it tightly in his bruised hand, letting its shape anchor him. The fall had hurt, but it had also taught him something vital. The only thing worse than falling was refusing to get up. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving behind that peculiar scent of damp earth and moss that reminded Thomas Grant of his childhood, of early mornings on his grandfather's farm in Kentucky, where the world felt wide and slow and trustworthy. That memory, distant and fragrant, was a strange comfort as he sat alone in his study, the bruises on his hip pulsing faintly, and the cut on his palm now bandaged but still sore. Judith had left early. She said there was an emergency board meeting. No mention of the fall, no gentle goodbye, just the sound of her heels and the front door closing with a soft click that felt colder than the rain had. He had replayed her conversation on the phone last night. Her voice low, clipped, speaking to someone named Carl. Yes, the fall helped. No, he's not resisting yet. Just give me 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks. It echoed in his skull like a countdown to a razor. She was preparing her move, and so was he. He dressed himself carefully, a task he hadn't done entirely alone since the accident. It took twice as long, and he winced at every tug near his ribs. But he did it. The shoes were mismatched. He could feel the subtle difference in the soles, but that didn't matter. He needed only one thing this morning, to meet Jada again. When the driver pulled up out front, Thomas used his cane to feel his way down the stairs. The driver, a young man named Miguel, jumped out to assist, but Thomas held up a hand. "I've got it," he said. Miguel hesitated. "Sir, are you sure?" "Positive. Just take me to Central Heights Park, West Entrance." Thomas arrived 20 minutes early. It was quiet, the city still rubbing the sleep from its eyes. He settled onto the bench carefully, feeling the warmth of the morning sun on his face. No, Judith. No, Jada. Just space to breathe. He waited, and then quiet footsteps on damp stone. "You're early," she said. "So are you." "I don't sleep much," Jada replied. He smiled. "I didn't sleep at all." She sat beside him. And he could feel her presence like a shift in the air. "I heard about the fall," she said softly. "You saw it?" "Yes." He turned his head toward her. "Why didn't you stay?" "She scares me," Jada whispered. "Your wife, her light is angry, sharp." He nodded. "She's trying to take everything. Then we have to stop her." He smiled grimly. "You make that sound simple." "It is," she said, "but not easy." She paused, then reached into her pocket. "I brought something." He heard the faint jingle of metal, then felt her place something into his hand. A necklace. The chain thin and light, but the pendant at the end was heavy, circular, smooth edges. He ran his fingers over it, letters carved deep. "What is it?" "A St. Lucy's medal," she said. "She's the patron saint of the blind. It used to belong to my grandmother." She said it helped her find her way. Thomas held it tight. "Jada, why are you helping me?" She was quiet for a long time. "Because people like her always win," she said finally. "They lie. They smile. They take. And people like you. You stay quiet. You disappear. But not this time." Thomas blinked back the emotion threatening to rise. "You're just a child and you're just a man," she said. "We're both more than they think we are." He chuckled softly. "You ever think you're too wise for your own good?" "Every day." She stood suddenly. "I need to go. There's someone I want you to meet tomorrow." He raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "A friend. He knows things. People don't believe him either, but he sees what others miss. He might be able to help." Thomas hesitated. "Can I trust him?" "If you trust me," she said. "You'll trust him." "Then I will," she smiled. And even though he couldn't see it, he could feel it like sunshine breaking through fog. "I'll meet you here," she said. "Same time." And just like that, she was gone. Thomas sat in silence, turning the metal over in his hand again and again. It felt solid, real, like something ancient and sacred, something to believe in. That afternoon, Judith returned home, her tone saccharine, and rehearsed. "How are you feeling?" she asked, setting down a tray. "Better," he said. "Test helped." She moved to sit beside him, brushing his shoulder. "You know, if this is all too much, there are other options. You don't have to keep pushing yourself." Other options?" "There's a facility in Austin," she said casually. "Quiet, comfortable. They specialize in care for men like you." Thomas kept his voice steady. "Men like me?" She smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Men who've done enough, who deserve to rest." And what would happen to the company? I'd oversee things, of course, temporarily. Just until you're settled. He said nothing. Let the silence bloom. Later that night, he sat in his study with the recorder again. This is Thomas Grant, he said softly. She's accelerating her plan, suggesting I step down permanently. I won't. Not yet. Not while I still have my mind and my allies. He touched the metal. Not all light came from sight. Some light came from faith, and some from a small girl with a big heart who refused to let him fade. Thomas arrived at Central Heights Park early again, earlier than usual, feeling the chill of morning air through his coat. His cane tapped along the familiar cracks in the walkway, but his steps were more confident now, less out of necessity and more out of intent. The small St. Lucy's medal hung beneath his collar, resting over his heart. He touched it every few steps like a rhythm, like a compass. He settled on the bench, his body still sore from the fall days earlier. But the bruises were fading. What wasn't fading was the quiet fire inside him, something Jada had stirred awake. Each day, her words carved through the fog Judith had wrapped around his world. This morning would be different. Jada had promised someone would come, a friend, someone who sees what others miss. Thomas didn't know what to expect. A doctor, a street preacher, a child like her. The air shifted and he heard footsteps. Not the light, soft rhythm of a child, but firm, deliberate adult work boots by the sound. The man sat down beside him without a word. The bench groaned under the weight. Silence settled. You're Thomas, the man said after a moment, voice deep, rough, like gravel over stone. I am. She told me, you might not believe me. Try me. The man took a breath. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a priest. I don't fix people. I find things. Thomas turned his head slightly. Things, truth, motives, people's weak spots. A detective? No, the man replied. Worse. I used to work for people like your wife. That made Thomas straighten. I was an enabler. The man continued. I helped people bury things. Evidence, secrets. They paid me well until I saw one too many lives crushed for a payout. And now I try to stop it before it gets too far. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then asked, what did she hire you for? The man hesitated. 2 years ago, Judith approached my former firm. Wanted intel on the board, dirt on key shareholders. She called it contingency planning. Thomas tightened his grip on the bench. I never knew. You weren't supposed to. That's how these people work. They move slow. They soften the ground before they strike. And you? I left before I took the job, but I remembered the name. Then a few weeks ago, a little girl shows up at a food pantry where I volunteer. Smart as hell. Asked questions. Said her friend was in trouble. Thomas smiled faintly. Jada. Yeah. Jada. What now? Thomas asked. Can you help me stop her? I already started. The man said, you were right to be suspicious. I traced a few things. Judith's been moving funds, small transfers, offshore accounts through shell names. Her lawyer, Carl Ramsey, is ex-corporate fraud. She's planning a declaration of mental incompetence, says you've been confused, disoriented, even paranoid. She's documenting it, building a case. Thomas took a deep breath. How long do I have? A week, maybe 2, before she files. And you? Why help now? The man didn't speak for a while. Then he said, because I ruined enough lives before. I owe the universe some balance. And because Jada believes in you, that kind of faith, it's rare. I figured I'd better find out why. Thomas nodded slowly. What's your name? Just call me Walker. All right, Walker. So, what do we do? I'll send you files, hidden recordings, statements. You'll need a lawyer that works for you, not her. I know someone good. What else? You need to act normal. Let her believe you're still half broken. Let her get confident. Meanwhile, we build our case. Thomas's fingers traced the St. Lucie medal beneath his shirt. I'm not a fool, he said. I know I've been quiet too long, passive, but that ends now. Walker stood. That's what I hoped to hear. He turned to leave but paused and Thomas watched the nurse she hired last week. Jennifer, she's not who she says she is. With that, he walked off, boots crunching softly over damp gravel. A moment later, smaller, lighter steps approached. You met him, Jada said, sliding onto the bench beside him. I did. He's intense. She grinned. He's kind, just doesn't know how to show it. He told me about you. How you found him? I asked around. People trust kids with questions more than adults. They don't see us coming. Thomas shook his head. Odd. You shouldn't have to do this. Neither should you. They sat in silence for a long moment. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere a bike chain rattled. I've got a war coming, Thomas said quietly. I know, Jada replied. But you've got soldiers now. He turned toward her. You're more than that. She smiled. Maybe, but we fight better together. She stood, adjusting her backpack. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time. He nodded. Same time. As she walked away, Thomas leaned back on the bench, bruises dulling but heart steady. The enemy had a name, and so did hope. Jennifer knocked softly on the door to Thomas's study before stepping in without waiting for a response. Her voice, warm and well-practiced, filled the room. Good morning, Mr. Grant. Time for your medication. Thomas sat by the window, hands resting calmly on the arms of his chair. He didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. He could feel the shift in the air the moment she entered, the faint scent of gardenia, the careful pause before her footsteps crossed the rug. It was all part of her routine. And his. Leave it on the tray, he said quietly. You should really take it now, sir. It's already past 9. I'll take it shortly. Jennifer hesitated just long enough to mark her unease. She placed the small cup of pills and glass of water down with more force than necessary. Judith wants to make sure you're on schedule. The new dosage is important. I haven't noticed any difference, Thomas replied. Except that I sleep more and think less. She said nothing to that, only cleared her throat and said, I'll check back in an hour. As she walked away, Thomas listened carefully to the door click shut, then reached beneath the chair cushion and pulled out a second cup empty, clean, identical, one he'd used to secretly dispose of his medications for 3 days now. Walker had warned him the pills might be tampered with. Too much sedation could be used as false evidence of cognitive decline. He dumped the untouched pills into the empty cup, capped it tightly, and slipped it into the drawer beside the voice recorder. Every piece mattered now. Every detail had weight. Later that morning, Walker's courier arrived, posing as a book delivery from the Blind Veterans Audio Library. Thomas smiled at the cleverness. Judith had long since stopped checking his packages. She assumed he was too far gone to care. Inside were 2 flash drives, one labeled accounts and the other audio. Walker had promised evidence, and it was here, hidden in plain sight. He called Jada that evening using the burner phone Walker had slipped into his coat earlier that week. She answered on the second ring. You okay? She asked without greeting. Fine, he said. Nurse Jennifer is being watched and the audio is here. I'm going through it tonight. Want me to come by? Not yet. Too risky. But soon. There was a pause on the line. I hate waiting. Jada muttered. So do I, They ended the call and Thomas spent the next hour listening with headphones, rewinding several times when Judith's voice, his wife's voice, confirmed everything. The manipulation, the offshore transfers, even a quiet conversation about a false diagnosis being prepared by a medical professional on her payroll. She was building the perfect trap. Calm, professional, irrefutable, and he'd nearly fallen for it. Until Jada. Until the fall, until the quiet moments when he stopped letting blindness define his whole existence. The next day, he walked more confidently into the park. He didn't use the cane as much. Miguel, the driver, watched him with quiet surprise, but said nothing. Just opened the door and helped him down like usual. Jada was already on the bench, legs swinging, hands clasped around a cup of warm oatmeal. "You look taller," she teased as he approached. "I feel taller." She scooted over to make room. Eyes scanning the park automatically. "Jennifer tried to call someone last night," she said without preamble. "Blocked number. I couldn't hear much, but she mentioned a report. Something being signed." Thomas nodded. "She's part of the plan. I'm sure of it now, but I have the recordings." "Good. What's next?" "I meet with Walker's lawyer. She's discreet, aggressive. She knows corporate warfare better than Judith ever will." You trust her?" "Walker trusts her. That's enough for now." Jada passed him a napkin. "Wipe your hands. You've got something on your coat." He chuckled. "You're more nurse than my nurse. Speaking of, I saw Jennifer at the pharmacy this morning. She bought something. A new prescription." Thomas turned slightly. "For me, maybe." Couldn't get close enough to read the label. He filed that away. Another detail for the pile. It was all coming together now. Pieces of a puzzle being laid out by a girl with eyes too sharp for her age and a man with a conscience built from mistakes. They sat in silence, the air warming as the sun climbed higher. "I keep thinking," Thomas said after a while, "about how easy it is to lose yourself. One minute you're building something, a company, a family, a life, and the next you're just surviving it." Jada nodded solemnly. "That's why people like your wife win. Because they count on you forgetting who you are." "Not anymore," he said. "I've remembered." She smiled. Not just with her lips, but with her whole presence. "Then you're ready." "Ready for what?" "To take back what's yours." He reached into his coat and touched the metal again. "A habit now. A reminder." Then he said something he hadn't dared speak aloud until now. "She loved me once. I believe that. But now she only loves power. And I was in the way." Jada said nothing, just reached over and placed her hand on his. "Then it's time to move." He nodded, steady and clear. They stood together, an unlikely alliance forged in secrecy and pain, bound by trust and a sense of justice that went far beyond the courtroom. The storm was coming, and this time he wouldn't be caught beneath it. He'd be the one calling the lightning. The law office didn't look like much from the outside, just a brick townhouse wedged between a florist and a bail bondsman on a quiet street downtown. No gleaming glass tower, no polished marble floors. But when Thomas Grant stepped through the door, leaning slightly on his cane, but walking taller than ever, he felt something shift. The receptionist, a woman with a smoky voice and the scent of lavender, greeted him warmly. "Mr. Grant, Miss Price is expecting you. Right through that door." The room beyond was narrow but neat, filled with leather-bound books and sunlight cutting across worn hardwood floors. At the far end, behind a cluttered desk with a brass nameplate reading, "Naomi Price, ESQ, sat a woman with a sharp chin, silver streaks in her black hair, and eyes that missed nothing. She stood when he entered. "Mr. Grant," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "It's an honor." Thomas took the chair across from her. "I'm not sure honor is the right word. I'm half blind and nearly robbed blind." Price sat, flipping open a file already thick with papers. "Yes, but you're still standing. That counts." They got down to business quickly. Walker had already provided her with the audio files and financial trails. She had cross-checked them against recent corporate records, traced suspicious account movements, and identified 3 board members Judith had likely influenced with financial promises. "She's meticulous," Price said, admiration laced with disgust. "Started planting seeds more than a year ago." The false incompetency case, the power of attorney revisions, the medical manipulation. This wasn't spontaneous. She planned to dismantle me in silence, Thomas said. Yes. Price agreed, and she nearly succeeded. But you've got something she didn't count on. Thomas raised an eyebrow. What's that? An unexpected witness. A little girl who's smarter than half the lawyers I've met. I smiled. Jada. Price leaned forward. I want to bring her in discreetly. Not to testify yet, but to record a formal statement. She's credible. Her age actually helps. Judges listen harder when children speak clearly. I'll talk to her, Thomas said. But I won't risk her safety. Not for me. She's already at risk, Mr. Grant. Because she stood by you. Judith's people are watching your movements more than you think. We need to move fast. What do you need from me? He asked. 3 things, Price said, ticking them off on her fingers. 1. We file a countersuit before she can file hers. You'll claim duress, manipulation, medical coercion. 2. We serve an injunction freezing any further transfers or asset reallocations. And 3. We call a private meeting with the board. She'll know something's coming. She already suspects you figured her out. It's better to confront her while she's still pretending to play nice. Once she's backed into a corner, she'll lash out, and that's when we'll catch her. Thomas exhaled slowly. All right, let's do it. As he stood, Price reached for a manila envelope. One more thing. I need you to start writing down what you remember. Your relationship with Judith, key events, the first signs of change. It helps us build a psychological profile of the marriage for court. I'll start tonight. She walked into the door. Mr. Grant. Yes. You may be losing your sight, but you've regained something far more valuable. What's that? Your voice. Back in the car, Thomas asked Miguel to take the long route through the city. He rolled the window down, letting the autumn air hit his face. He thought of Price's words, his voice. For too long, he'd let silence speak for him. Let others decide what he felt, needed, deserved. No more. Back at the estate, he found Jada waiting near the fountain, sitting cross-legged with her notebook on her lap. She stood when she saw him, or rather when she heard his cane tapping along the stones. You're early, she said. So are you. She smiled. How was the lawyer? Sharp, dangerous, on our side. Jada nodded approvingly. What's next? We go on record. She wants your testimony. Jada didn't flinch. Okay. You sure? You don't have to do this. Jada folded her arms. If she gets away with this, she'll do it again to someone else. Maybe someone who doesn't have a me or a Walker or a Naomi Price. Thomas chuckled. You sound like a closing argument. She grinned. I've been practicing. He sat beside her on the low stone wall. I'll start writing everything down tonight. Every memory that matters. Every lie she told that I believed. That's the first step, Jada said. Truth always starts with memory. They sat in silence. The wind rustling through the tall hedges. The world quiet except for the occasional chirp of a bird or hum of a distant lawnmower. Do you think she ever loved me? Thomas asked suddenly. Jada was quiet for a moment. Maybe. But power is louder than love for some people. They forget who they were to chase what they think they deserve. He nodded slowly. That's what I became. An obstacle to her empire. Then let's remind her, Jada said, standing, that the man she tried to erase isn't done yet. He smiled. Not with bitterness, but with resolve. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That evening, as the sky shifted from steel blue to violet, Thomas stood at the window of his study, his fingertips brushing the cool glass. He couldn't see the sunset, but he could feel its warmth pulling away from the world. Behind him, the house was still, too still. Judith had not returned, which wasn't unusual anymore. Her nights were increasingly late, her explanations thinner, her excuses mechanical. He welcomed the silence now. It gave him time to write. On his desk lay 3 pages already filled in his tight, slanted handwriting. His hand ached from the effort, but his memory poured out clearer than he'd expected. The first year with Judith, her charm, her ambition, the late nights building the company together. Then the shift, the sharp words, the passive control, the subtle dismissal of his opinions like water carving stone. It happened slowly until he couldn't tell when he stopped speaking up. He paused, fingers resting on the edge of the paper, then picked up the pen again. It was the night of the shareholders' gala, he wrote. She wore red. I remember that red like warning. I was sick, double vision, migraines. She told me I was just tired, but the next day I collapsed. That was the beginning of the decline. And she never once suggested seeing a real doctor. Just gave me the specialist she'd handpicked. He stopped again. His breathing was uneven. A knock at the door. He turned, expecting silence. Instead, a voice filtered in soft, measured, deliberate. Thomas, may I come in? It was Judith. He hesitated. You're home early. I thought I'd check on you, she said, stepping in. I saw your light was still on. She moved with grace, her heels muffled on the carpet. She stopped short of his desk, eyeing the papers. Writing something? Thomas smiled thinly. A bit of reflection. Feels overdue. She tilted her head. Are you feeling better? I think clearer. Good, she said quickly. Clarity is important. He said nothing. She moved closer. I've been worried about you, Thomas. Ever since the fall, you've seemed unsettled. You mean since I stopped swallowing everything I was told? Her face didn't twitch, not visibly, but her breath caught for half a second. I've always done what's best for you, she said. No, he said calmly. You've done what's best for you and convinced me it was the same. She stepped back, folding her arms. Is this how it's going to be now? Accusations and dramatics. No, Thomas said, it's going to be facts, evidence, and choices. She narrowed her eyes. You don't have the strength for this, Thomas. I didn't, he said, but someone gave it back to me. Her brow furrowed. A girl, he added. You wouldn't notice her. That's your mistake. You only see threats when they wear suits. You've been manipulated, she snapped. No, he said. I've been awakened. Judith's face shifted. Her veneer cracked just slightly. I'll make tea, she said abruptly, turning on her heel. You need rest. When the door closed, Thomas exhaled. His hands trembled slightly. He reached for the phone and dialed a secure number. Walker answered on the second ring. She knows, Thomas said. She's guessing, Walker replied, let her. Just be careful. She wants me to feel safe. That means she's almost ready to strike. Then we stay ahead. Naomi's prepped the injunction. You ready to sign? First thing tomorrow. Good. And Jada? She's stronger than we think. Isn't she always? Walker chuckled faintly. Keep the recorder on. Every conversation, even the quiet ones. I already did, Thomas said. This one's gold. He hung up and slipped the small digital recorder deeper into the drawer beside the sealed pills. The file would be labeled Tea Talk. A calm domestic visit layered with threat. Downstairs, he heard the kettle whistle. He didn't move. Instead, he opened the desk again and took out the St. Lucy's medal. He ran his thumb across it slowly. The carved image cool and unyielding. He didn't need eyes to see Judith anymore. The next morning, Thomas sat across from Naomi Price in her office. The injunction was printed, notarized, bound. It would be delivered to the financial authorities by noon. You'll need to prepare for blowback, she warned. She'll fight and she'll be cruel. I've seen cruel, Thomas said, and I'm done tolerating it. She handed him a second folder. This is your personal statement. You'll present it to the board. I suggest memorizing it. Show them strength. He nodded. Judith may still try to make you look confused, mentally unstable. Any slip up? I won't give her one. Price smiled. Good, because we're in this now all the way. Thomas left the office with a sense of gravity, not fear, not hope, just weight. But it was the kind of weight a man shoulders when he stops running and starts standing. Back at the park that afternoon, Jada was waiting with 2 small cups of ice cream. You look different, she said, offering him the chocolate swirl. I am. She studied his face. She knows you're awake. Yes, then it's begun. He nodded. The first move was mine. They sat in the sun, quiet, breathing. She'll come for you, Jada said softly. I know. Are you ready? Thomas licked his ice cream, then smiled. I've never been more ready in my life. By noon the next day, the injunction was filed. The board was notified. Judith's shell accounts were frozen under suspicion of fraudulent transfer. Within hours, the house shifted. Not physically, but in tension, in tone, in temperature. Even the staff, few as they were, moved more carefully. Eyes downcast, words clipped. Thomas felt it in the air like electricity before a storm. Judith did not return home until dusk. He heard the engine hum in the driveway. The car door slammed harder than usual, her heels on the step sharp and fast. No hesitation. The front door burst open, then slammed shut again. Thomas didn't rise from the study. He knew she'd come straight to him. She didn't knock. She never did. So, she said, standing in the doorway. Her tone was calm, measured, but her breath was quick. You've made your move. Thomas set his pen down and folded his hands. I had no choice. She stepped inside, closing the door with a gentler click this time. You think you've won something, don't you? I think I've stopped losing, he replied. That's enough for now. She walked to the desk slowly, deliberately, her heels sinking slightly into the thick carpet. You don't understand what you've done. Freezing those accounts, bringing in lawyers, investigators. You've exposed us both. No, he said, I've exposed you. Her eyes flickered. You think the board will take your side? A half-blind man who's been falling apart for months? Better than a woman funneling company assets into private channels. She leaned forward, her voice low and almost tender. Thomas, I tried to protect you. No, he said. You tried to replace me. There's a difference. She straightened. And now what? You'll drag your name through the courts? Turn this into a media circus? You'll kill what we built. I built it, he said. You tried to bury it. Her eyes narrowed. You really think anyone will believe you? He opened the drawer and pressed play on the recorder. Her voice from the previous night filled the room. I've always done what's best for you. Clarity is important. You seemed unsettled. It wasn't damning, not outright, but it was suggestive, calculated, patterned. Judith's face went still. I have more, he said quietly. She stared at him, then turned without a word and walked out. He sat still long after the door closed. Not because he was afraid, but because she hadn't denied it, not once. Later that evening, Jada called. She went to the board chair, she whispered. I saw her. She brought that slick lawyer, Carl. They didn't look happy. Did she say anything? No, but Carl looked like he wanted to break something. Thomas nodded, pressing the phone tighter. It's starting. You ready? I have to be. The next morning, Naomi Price called. She's responding with her own motion, claiming your decline began earlier than reported. She's citing fatigue, memory issues, even paranoia. We expected this. We're already preparing affidavits to counter it. And Jada's testimony will help. When do I speak to the board? Tomorrow, noon, Thomas exhaled. Are you sure you want to do this yourself? Naomi asked. I can speak on your behalf. No, he said, they need to hear me. That night, he didn't sleep much. He reviewed his statement over and over. Each word memorized, rehearsed. But it wasn't just the words. It was the feeling behind them, the conviction he needed to project. This wasn't just about saving his company. It was about reclaiming his identity. The next day, Miguel drove him to the headquarters. The building hadn't changed. The same steel and glass, the same polished lobby, but Thomas walked through it differently now. His cane tapped steadily, his back was straight, and his chin was high. He was escorted into the boardroom, large oval table, 12 chairs. The full board was present. Judith sat at the far end, flanked by Carl Ramsey. Naomi Price stood behind him. The chairwoman nodded. Mr. Grant, you may begin. Thomas stood. His hand rested lightly on the chair's back. His voice was clear, steady. 4 months, I'd been silent. Partly because of illness. Partly because I trusted the wrong people to speak for me. But that ends now. He paused. Looked toward Judith. Someone I trusted, someone I loved has worked behind closed doors to declare me unfit. Not because I am, but because my presence was inconvenient to her plans. Judith's jaw tightened. She built a case on manipulated evidence, sedative medications, and silence. But I have rediscovered my voice, and I'm using it to tell the truth. He turned back to the board. I may be blind, but I see more clearly now than I ever did. And what I see is corruption, betrayal, and a quiet attempt to steal everything I built. He laid out the facts, the audio files, the financial records, the statements Naomi had collected, and Jada's account as eyewitness to the very conversations that exposed the betrayal. He ended with this. I didn't ask for this fight, but now that it's here, I won't back down because the company we built together it deserves integrity, and so do I. Silence followed. Then the chairwoman spoke. Well, deliberate. You'll receive our decision within 48 hours. Judith didn't look at him as he left. Outside in the sun, Thomas let the air fill his lungs. He didn't know what the board would decide, but he knew this. He had finally truly stood up. 2 days passed with the weight of silence pressing on every hour. Thomas spent most of the time in his study, alternating between dictating thoughts into a digital recorder and listening to old jazz records that once soothed his mind during the earliest years of his success. The music once background now felt like company voices that didn't judge, rhythms that reminded him who he used to be. Jada came each afternoon. She didn't talk much. She didn't need to. She simply sat with him, sketching on a pad, humming quietly. Her presence, like the jazz, reminded him of something steady, something real. She didn't ask him if he was nervous. She didn't have to, but she did ask him once as the sun dipped below the skyline. If they say no, what will you do? Thomas thought for a moment. Start again, he said. Even if it means walking away, he turned his head toward her. Justice doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it's just making sure the world hears the truth before the silence returns. Oh, that night Judith didn't come home. There were no calls, no explanations, only absence. And strangely, the house felt larger, lighter, as if the walls had exhaled. On the morning of the third day, just before breakfast, Naomi called. They voted, she said without preamble. It was close. 6-5, but in your favor. Thomas closed his eyes. I keep the company. You keep everything. They're launching an internal investigation into Judith's actions. She's been suspended from all decision-making authority, Carl too. He let the words settle, then nodded. Thank you, Naomi added. Don't celebrate too loud. This isn't the end. She still has options. She may go public. She may sue. But the narrative has changed. You're not the confused old man anymore. I never was. But now everyone knows it. After hanging up, he walked to the front parlor and sat down. The morning sun streamed in through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt grounded, anchored, like the world had finally stopped spinning under his feet. Jada arrived 30 minutes later. She was already smiling when she stepped through the door. You heard? I did. She bounded over and hugged him without asking. He froze for a moment, then hugged her back. You did it, she whispered. No, he said softly. We did. They celebrated with vanilla milkshakes and grilled cheese sandwiches ordered from a diner 2 blocks away that had been there since 1963. The kind of place Thomas hadn't stepped into in decades. But Jada insisted it was the only proper way to mark the moment. Something old, something warm, and no forks needed, she said, grinning as they sat on the back patio, the city humming in the distance. Thomas took a breath and said, There's more I want to do. Yat till her hill. Like what? Start a foundation for kids like you. Smart, invisible, overlooked by the system. Give them tools to be seen. Her eyes widened. You're serious? I am. We'll call it the light we carry. Jada smiled so hard it crinkled her nose. I get to help name it. You just did. Later that evening, Judith finally returned. She didn't storm in. She didn't slam doors. She walked quietly, her heels subdued, her steps slow. She found Thomas in the study exactly where she'd always expected to find him. Congratulations, she said, folding her arms. Thank you. She didn't sit, just stood there watching him. You won this round, she said. But you've burned bridges. No, he replied. I've rebuilt mine. You just didn't realize you were never invited to cross again. She exhaled sharply. Do you really think you're better than me? I think I finally remembered who I am, and I like him a lot more than the man who stayed quiet to keep you comfortable. There was silence. Then she asked, What happens now? You leave, he said simply. The board has initiated legal proceedings. You'll receive formal notice tomorrow. This house, this life is no longer yours. She stared at him, eyes sharp, jaw clenched. You're not the man I married. No, he said. I'm the man I should have been. Judith turned and left without another word. And when the door closed this time, Thomas didn't flinch. The house didn't echo. The air didn't tremble. It just settled. That night, before bed, he recorded one final message on the small device beside his lamp. This is Thomas Grant. I once believed that silence was strength, that endurance was dignity. But I know now true strength is in standing up, even when the world expects you to fold. My story isn't over. It's just finally mine again. He turned off the recorder. Then, for the first time in months, he slept deeply, peacefully, without fear. The rain came gently, like a quiet apology from the sky, soft and steady, soaking the sidewalks of Central Heights Park, where it had all begun. Thomas stood beneath a large oak tree near the west bench, the one he used to occupy in solitude, back when blindness had felt like exile and the world had narrowed to shapes and sounds. Now he was no longer alone. Jada stood beside him, umbrella in hand, her sneakers wet from puddles, but her spirit unbothered. She handed him a small crumpled ribbon, blue silk, frayed at the ends. What's this? He asked, turning it between his fingers. My mom's, she said. She used to say it gave her strength on bad days. I figured maybe it's your turn. Thomas's voice caught before he could speak. He swallowed hard and nodded. Thank you, he whispered. The day marked the quiet launch of the Light We Carry Foundation, their first outreach event at a local community center that had nearly closed due to funding. Jada had insisted on starting there. She said the place had good bones, and she was right. The center was nothing grand. The walls needed paint. The floors creaked, but the air buzzed with laughter and possibility. Kids from all over the neighborhood had shown up, drawn in by flyers, free food, and something harder to define: hope. Thomas entered slowly, accompanied by Miguel and a cane more for posture than need. A hush fell as he stepped inside, and then, applause. Not thunderous or forced, just genuine, respectful. Naomi Price stood near the podium, clipboard in hand, flanked by city council members, local press, and 3 teachers from the district. She approached him with a warm smile. "You're early," she said. "I couldn't stay away." She nodded toward the back where a banner stretched across the wall, painted by hand. "The light we carry. Empowering voices in silence." Thomas's name was beneath it, but so was Jada's in smaller but equally bold letters. "Let's make it official," Naomi said, guiding him to the podium. He adjusted the microphone slowly, his fingers brushing the cool steel. Then he spoke months ago. "I thought my story had ended, that I'd been written out of the life I helped create. But then a stranger, barely tall enough to see over a table, reminded me that stories don't end, they evolve. They bend, they stretch, and if we're lucky, they begin again." He paused, hearing Jada's breath catch from the front row. "This foundation isn't about redemption," he continued. "It's about recognition. For every child who's been overlooked, for every voice muted by poverty, race, disability, or neglect, we're here to say, we see you. We hear you. And you matter." The applause this time was louder. Thomas stepped back and gestured toward Jada, who approached the podium with a mix of nerves and pride. She cleared her throat and spoke without notes. "I don't have a big speech. I'm not famous. I'm not even tall," she said, drawing soft laughter from the room. "But I know what it's like to be invisible. And I know what it's like when someone finally sees you. Mr. Grant saw me and then he let me help him. That's what this is about, helping each other, even when we think we can't." Thunderous applause followed. Jada blushed and stepped down. Returning to Thomas's side, he leaned in and whispered, "You just stole my speech." "Good," she whispered back. "It was too long anyway." They spent the rest of the day shaking hands, meeting kids, signing paperwork, and watching the community center come alive again. Music played, laughter echoed, and somewhere in that controlled chaos, Thomas felt something open inside him, a kind of healing he hadn't known he needed. Later that evening, after the last guest had left, and the rain had finally stopped, Thomas and Jada stood on the center's front steps. The sky was streaked with orange and purple. Wet pavement shimmered like glass. "You ever miss who you were before?" she asked. Thomas thought about it. "No," he said slowly. "But I respect him. He survived long enough for me to find my way back." She nodded. "He'd be proud." He smiled. "I think he is." A soft rustle came from behind a bouquet of white lilies wrapped in newspaper left by someone anonymous. Attached to it was a note handwritten in neat cursive. "You found the light. Thank you for carrying it forward." Thomas read the words twice, then handed them to Jada. "Let's keep going," he said. She grinned. "We've got more stories to rewrite." Together, they walked down the steps and into the night. Not just survivors of a quiet war, but the authors of a new legacy. The following week felt like waking from a dream and stepping into daylight. Thomas walked through his old halls echoing with silence and found them alive with energy. Files labeled Foundation. New mail inviting. Partnership. Even a photographer knocking at the door to capture the story. Doors that closed too long were now open, but every glow carried a shadow. Jada arrived one morning carrying a stack of art supplies. "Kids want to paint their dreams," she said, eyes bright. "We're starting a mural project." Thomas nodded, delighted. He guided her inside, brushing a hand across the familiar armrest at the end of the stairs place that had anchored him not long ago. He took a seat beside her at the kitchen table. The metal rested safely around his neck. The recorder lay untouched on the desk. Judith had not returned since chapter 13. That absence, it felt like a presence turned hollow, but the tension under the surface remained. The legal threads were still unraveling. Naomi had warned that Judith might go public, spin false narratives, or even attempt reconciliation just to weaken his resolve. That afternoon, Thomas received a letter. He recognized the tight handwriting instantly. His son David, his words were brief, polite, cautious. "Dad, I saw what you did at the foundation. Proud of you. Can we talk? Maybe grab coffee at the usual place." Thomas thumbed the note carefully, the paper trembling in his fingers. For months, the relationship had felt fractured beyond repair, but this was tentative. Reaching across the gap, he sat with the note a long moment, then pressed a gentle breath. He would say yes. That evening, he joined Naomi Price at her office. The mood was sober but strategic. Judith filed a counterclaim, she reported. Claiming lost companionship, emotional distress, defamation. It's messy. She's going for sympathy. Thomas rubbed his temples. We expected this. She's also arranging press interviews. Naomi paused. One news outlet asked for an exclusive. They want to tell her side of the story. A devoted wife hurt by allegations. He leaned back deep in thought. Let's offer our own interview with Jada if she'll agree. Let the world hear her message, her voice. Naomi nodded slowly. We can arrange it. The local NPR feature reaches exactly the audience we want. Do it. That night, Thomas wrote the first letter to David in years, agreeing to meet. His words were simple. Yes, coffee. Tomorrow morning. Then he slept deeply, buoyed by the possibility of reconciliation and empowerment, both at once. The sun rose crisp and cool over Houston. Thomas waited at their old cafe table by the window. Kane leaned carefully to one side. When David arrived, he wore the same tentative expression Thomas recalled from a different era. And yet there was something new, respect, or at least curiosity. They talked at length about the foundation, about Jada, about healing. David shared grief over the secrets his mother had kept, guilt that he hadn't seen sooner, and pride that his father had reclaimed his life so consciously. Thomas listened more than spoke. He didn't blame, but he didn't erase either. They agreed to try again slowly, honestly. The first handshake felt like rewriting decades of silence. That afternoon, at the Foundation HQ behind closed doors, Thomas watched a group of children dip brushes into paint. Jada directed color onto a blank wall, bright blues, warm oranges, faces emerging from shapes. She painted a girl holding a ribbon, and beside her, a man with a medal around his neck. Their story, their myth, their truth. Thomas felt tears prick at his eyelashes, eyes closed because sight had never been necessary to know beauty. Just then Naomi slipped in. Interview is scheduled. Jada's agreed. He looked at her silent for a heartbeat more. Let the world hear us, he said quietly. Days later, they recorded the NPR segment. Jada spoke about darkness and trust, about being seen and making someone see. Thomas spoke in cadence about betrayal, faith, and the slow bloom of justice. Listeners would hear the sincerity in his voice and note anger, not regret, but clarity. A week after that, the board chair called with an update. The internal investigation confirmed wrongdoing. Judith had resigned. No longer connected to the company or the board. Carl Ramsey had been exposed. Legal actions would follow, but the foundation stood firm, growing stronger. On the final evening of Chapter 14, twilight settled lightly across the patio where Thomas and Jada sat, tired but steady. He took the ribbon she gave him and tied it around the St. Lucy's medal. She watched. That's the spot. He felt a quiet swell of pride. You know, you didn't just save me. You helped me build something better. She shrugged, but the glow in her eyes said she understood. He tapped the ribbon gently. Together. She leaned in, always. Outside the world turned, but inside, beneath the ribbon and the medal, and within hearts once broken, light carried on. The first real quiet in weeks came just after midnight. Thomas sat alone in his study, the city lights dim beyond the window, his cane resting within arm's reach. All around him lay the traces of Progress Foundation letters, newspaper clippings, emails from volunteers. Yet for all the noise he'd overcome, the quiet felt different now. Intentional, full of promise, not fear. He reflected on the resilience found in small things like Jada's smile, the ribbon tied to the metal, the foundation walls springing to life with painted faces. Change didn't demand grandeur. It required constancy, and for the first time in years, he felt steady. That morning, news came that moved slowly through the community. A neglected elementary school downtown was shutting down. Budget cuts, low enrollment, kids displaced. Thomas felt that Old Ache 1 Jada understood, but he also felt something stronger. Obligation. He called Naomi. She needs help, he said. Right now, Naomi didn't hesitate. Within hours, the Light We Carry Foundation had shifted gears. Meetings were scheduled. Volunteers rallied. Funding proposals expedited. By afternoon, an emergency team of community liaison and educators had formed. The model worked. The mission expanded. That afternoon, Thomas and Jada toured the old school. Empty classrooms smelled of chalk and dust. Hallways echoed with memory even though the doors were closed. Jada slipped her hand into his. "We can bring this back," she said. "We will," he assured gently. They envisioned art walls, tutoring centers, after-school programs, meals, mentorship. They sketched ideas into a notebook Jada carried everywhere. Plans that started as whispers now grew. This place would become a hub, a second center to amplify light in places people had forgotten. Because power didn't end with one victory. It began with reach. Late evening, back at the mansion-turned-foundation base, David's former assistant, who had stayed loyal, knocked at the door, didn't speak before stepping inside. He handed Thomas a letter stamped from his lawyer. A settlement offer from Judith, quietly relinquish any claim, and avoid further litigation for a sum coupled with a public apology. No court, no headlines, just closure. Thomas studied the letter without opening it. He'd expected this, but seeing it triggered something deeper than triumph. It whispered of peace, of finality, of release. He thanked Davis and closed the door without replying. Jada found him in the study, reading quietly. She peered at the sealed envelope. "What now?" she asked. Thomas folded the letter. "Set it aside. We decide." Later that night, they sat on the patio again, the ribbon fluttering softly in the breeze. Thomas described his thoughts. "A settlement avoids more pain. It spares the foundation from distraction, but I don't know if acceptance feels like closure." Jada looked at him. "It's your choice. Closure looks different for everyone." He nodded. "I just want to make sure the next chapter starts right." The air was cool, quiet, intentional. He reached across and held the metal between his fingers, the ribbon grounded beneath his touch. Then he looked up. "Have I done enough?" he asked the silent sky. "Or is there more to build?" A robin called out from the hedge. Its song delicate, resolute. Beside him, Jada whispered, "There's always more because light spreads." In that moment, Thomas understood the horizon wasn't a boundary. It was an invitation. He nodded and said, "We build and we invite everyone else to carry it." They sat like that until the stars blurred softly overhead and together beneath ribbon and metal and the first stirrings of a new tomorrow. They looked forward to whatever came next, knowing they would face it side by side. The fight had changed them, but they had changed the fight, and light carried on. The morning sun rose soft and pale over the city, filtering through sheer curtains into Thomas's bedroom. He woke slowly, the ribbon-tied metal resting on his chest, still warm. The silence felt deliberate, not emptiness but purpose. He lay still for several minutes before sitting up. The world wasn't visible but it was vivid. By breakfast, Jada entered with 2 bowls of oatmeal topped with berries. She set them gently on the table. "How do you feel?" she asked, voice steady. "Like possibilities," he replied. She smiled. "Then we're on track." They ate quietly, a comfortable rhythm between them. Thomas thought.